Yeah, one day the brake just locked up. It's really easy to figure out, too, on a bike. You put it in neutral, and you're standing at a light, and you try to rock it back and forth, and the bike doesn't move. Or you're on a hill, and it doesn't want to roll back or forward. That's how you realize a brake's locked up. How I knew it was the rear, I don't remember. Do you?
No, I don't know if you mentioned it to me.
Oh, I know, because the pedal was down.
Oh, the pedal was sticking.
I could feel the pedal was down.
You'd have to pick it back up with your toe.
Yeah, that's right. Which seems really stupid looking back that I wasn't like, let's check the linkage first. But hey, maybe I was just bored. And maybe we just needed content.
So we decided to reseal the caliper because we assumed that the pistons were stuck in the caliper.
Yeah, which on cars is a pretty common occurrence. You can see that a lot where either the pads are stuck where they should be floating. They'll be stuck in a closed position. They won't return. That's why a lot of times on cars you'll see one side of the rotor is totally worn out and the other one looks pristine. Or the brake pad itself on one side is completely worn out. The other brake pad is fine. And that is because there's a mechanical issue not letting the caliper slide or the brake pad slide. That was my first assumption. My second assumption was, well, maybe the pistons are frozen in the caliper, which is why we pulled this whole thing apart. Which, again, was probably jumping the gun.
But either way, you got some new seals in your caliper. And some new pads.
And we got some new content.
Yeah, so you know your rear brake is good now.
But what's really important is we have more ways to help you, the viewers.
And on that note, we're going to show you how to take the rear caliper off of Dave's bike. So you had a problem with your rear brake on your bike.
Yeah, the problem was my Harley's rear brake was getting stuck, so it was applied even when my foot wasn't on it. So to get to it, we had to take the saddlebag off. 2 easy bolts. Those bolts, though, you got to be really careful with those 2 bolts because they also are what holds the fender on. I like the arrows. Nice effect.
So now we're trying to get the caliper off.
Yeah, so here, now we're opening the hydraulic system for the brakes. This starts the whole new ball game. Now that that system's open, it absolutely has to be flushed afterwards. Here we're cracking the banjo fitting. I think I just cracked that so we had some room, some wiggle room there. This is what you call a floating caliper. So only one side has the hydraulics on it. And all that does is push against it, and that pulls the other side towards it. So this is a floating caliper. Those bolts just hold it in place there. It doesn't actually secure it there.
It actually glides back and forth on those bolts.
Yeah, that's a way better description than what I said.
So we're trying to move the brake cable, and you can see there's one bolt tucked back behind there on the swing arm.
Oh, yeah, I guess there's just a hold-down clamp. You'll figure that out real quick when you're like, why isn't this thing moving?
Yeah, because we tried pulling the caliper off, and we had no slack with that cable, so we're trying to get some slack.
And sometimes calipers like this, they have to be compressed to get it out, especially if you have a problem where it's stuck down. Which compressing is pretty easy. You can stick a screwdriver in there and just give it a little pry to compress it. You just want to make sure you don't damage the piston itself. A lot of new pistons, too, are even composite, so it'd be real easy to chip or damage one of those.
Well, I thought they stopped making the Dynamiles. Is it a different frame now?
Yeah, you can see there I was even trying to push it by hand to compress those pistons back into the cylinder. It's not really going to happen.
Yeah, so basically you're just trying to wiggle it off of there a little bit at a time because there's pressure on there.
Yeah, I'm thinking
No one ever said working on mechanical things was easy.
Just have patience. Yeah, I don't exactly remember. Well, okay, yeah. I was just gonna say I'm not sure why I'm not prying it.
I know.
Here's it. I probably tried to take it off nice and gingerly and realized that wasn't gonna happen. So that's what you want to do is just compress it. It's best to do it with the pads on it. I rather screw up a pad than a piston. Most of the time we're replacing pads anyways. The compressor there on this side, so I have to push it.
Probably wouldn't pry the rotor either.
Yeah, you don't really want to get it on the rotor. You don't want to nick that thing up. Another little helpful hint if you are going to crack the hydraulic system, you could put a little hose on that bleeder screw there so the fluid goes away and open it up, and then if you try to compress it, it's way easier. I don't like to do that because I don't want to get fluid everywhere.
Brake fluid will eat your pain away.
Bleeders either open or they don't. This is the dangerous thing to do.
So the first thing, we're going to get the pistons out of the caliper.
Yeah, and for this you need compressed air. It's really helpful to have a blowgun with a rubber tip so you can fit it in that hole there.
So we got to remove the caliper.
And point it away from everybody. All you're doing is blowing some air in there, and that will blow the pistons right out of their cylinders.
The rag is a good idea. If you don't put the rag there, you could potentially damage the pistons and or caliper. Or if you hit it just right, the pistons will go flying.
Yeah, you don't want that either. Rag, cardboard, a little piece of wood or something soft. Another real good tip that I didn't do here was turn your air pressure down way low. You only need like 10, 20 psi. I think I pumped 100 in there.
Yeah, always a good idea to keep things in order and put them back where they came from, even if they look like they're exactly the same to your eye.
Absolutely everything. Everything should go back the way it came out. I mean, mark it for alignment, mark it for the position. I mean, even as a professional and doing this for every year, no matter how many times you do the same job, you just want to make sure everything goes back the way it is. You don't know the microscopic differences or just even the subtle differences that took years to wear in correctly. You don't want to cause any problems.
Yeah. And so those are the seals now, right? So those are what we want to replace.
Yeah, that's what keeps the piston in there and keeps the fluid from coming out. So that's what we're replacing there. Now, those are square seals. The theory behind everything is that's what causes the return of that piston. So that seal bends as it comes out, and then the return of that seal helps push the piston back in.
And you're just using a little pick to help them get you out of there.
When you use those picks, be real careful. Some of these have aluminum housings, real easy to scratch. You just want to make sure that you catch that seal and remove that. As long as you have a replacement seal, it's not a big deal if you damage the seal. If you don't have a replacement seal and you're trying to remove that, you really don't want to use a metal pick. I forgot that had 2 seals, huh?
Yeah, each cylinder had 2 seals, and
okay, as you can see, it's a little dirty in there. We're going to clean those grooves out. We want to make sure we get all the debris out of here. This should be about as spotless as possible. If you have a clean room, do it in there.
Don't we all?
Use a little Q-tip. Just get in there, get all that crap out of there.
nasty.
Right here, we're inspecting this piston to make sure there's no burrs, no nicks, no gouges or anything. That should be perfectly smooth. Just cleaning that up. Also want to make sure there's no lint from that rag on there. And here, I'm just catching the face of it with the sandpaper because it's a little rusty. That's the part that's out in the elements. I would never put sandpaper on the sides because those are the actual gliding surfaces. I'm just cleaning that up a little bit there. And just that little bit of the edge there so we don't have any burrs or anything.
That cleans up real nice.
So, time to install the new seals.
Yeah, what we're doing here is lubricating the seals with a little bit of multi-purpose grease. Always consult the book when you're doing this. Some manufacturers are going to tell you only use brake fluid to lubricate the seals. When in doubt, just use O-rings or seal grease. Those are good for most seals. And, sometimes multi-purpose grease can actually negatively affect your seals. We know from experience that these seals can handle that.
And no special tools required to get them back in. Just take your time and make sure they're in there nice and straight and flat.
It's so important that they're in there without rolling.
Something. Might be pushing for a screw.
And now that new seals are in, time to reinstall the cleaned up pistons.
Yeah, what I'm doing here is just putting a little bit of multi-purpose grease on it, just so it slides in real nice.
It came right back. Okay.
I'm going to bet money that we're going to get comments about using multi-purpose grease on a caliper. It works.
I'd be happy with any kind of comment. That means you're watching. The fit on these with the new seals is going to be pretty tight. You got to be careful when you're pushing them in and make sure that you get them as straight as possible.
Yeah, you don't want those seals to roll. When you get that in, it might be a little forced to get it past that starting point, but once it gets past that, they should move very freely. If there's any type of resistance, pull those pistons out and check. Make sure those did not roll on you. I'm really liking the fast forward.
And now the caliper's been resealed. A little cleanup at the end.
And as you can see in there, keep everything clean. Just clean, 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 clean. You want to be real careful here too. Those calipers are painted. Brake fluid does ruin paint. So I tried real hard to make sure all the brake fluid's wiped off. You can use water to wash that off because brake fluid's hygroscopic, so you can wash that off just with water, but you want to make sure it does not touch the paint.
It is never, ever done. Because it's hygroscopic, there's some arguments regarding that, and there is some friction modifiers you can put in.
And so you guys have new pads, right? I mean, if you're going to take the caliper off,
I guess
don't reuse the old pads. You might as well give yourself some new brake pads.
Yeah.
You're going through all this trouble.
Brake pads are relatively inexpensive. I highly recommend if the caliper ever comes off, new pads go on. You know, unless you just did the job or something, but still. Also, the wear pattern in those brake pads, you know, you don't want to put that pattern back on wrong, so.
Not saying that's what it is, but if I'm not mistaken, I remember that was the reason you don't mix them. They say gel. Okay, I'm changing my mind on that.
So what happened there? You were going to just set the pads on the rotor and then put the caliper over top of it. But that's typically what you do in a car. But in this case, it worked out better for you to put the pads in the caliper and then put it over the rotor altogether.
Yeah, the difference between this and a car is the car will have a caliper bracket, and that's usually where the pads ride. And then you put the caliper over the pads. This has the caliper bracket and the caliper as one. So you can't just put it on there and slap it on. It's easier to put it all together, and that's called a loaded caliper. It's easier to put it all together than set it down on top of that.
I don't think they could go that way because this is.
I think right here I forgot to put the little inserts for the pistons in.
Oh yeah, that is worth mentioning. We didn't have those up on the bench.
Yeah, the caliper has little composite inserts in there. My assumption why those even exist, it's probably some kind of vibration or noise dampening.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty safe assumption.
The point is, the manufacturer took the time to put it in there, and they spare every expense. So if they put money into it, it should be back in there.
That is a very, very true point.
Oh, yeah, you want to make sure that you grease all the riding surfaces for the pads themselves and for the caliper. Any place that slides on should be properly greased. You don't want that corroding. If that corrodes, they'll make an issue where it can't return, so your caliper might get stuck in a closed position or stuck in an open position.
Which would not be good.
Both situations are bad. I guess I would prefer it stuck closed. At least you're stopping. Stuck open, you got an issue.
There. Stop here.
There's nothing you have to do here about trying to line up the caliper on the rotor, because as soon as you put the bolts back in, that'll all be taken care of for you.
Yeah, there's no way to screw this one up. I hope.
Oh, that is in the sleeve, so this slides nice.
You can see there how the caliper slides on that bracket, which you just greased up. No, not a bracket.
This makes it to the final.
That's just
bushing.
bushing. Yeah. But that's specifically there, so it slides nice and free.
Do now. I don't even know what I was saying. The final cunt was pretty funny there. How come in Cleveland we can't just get...
Yeah, it looks like a little bushing that inserts there. That's just so the caliper rides freely on that bolt.
Oh, that makes sense now.
Something else worth noting,
It just gives it clear.
you guys see the banjo bolt just hanging there. That's on the end of the brake line. We replaced the washers on that bolt, and why do we do that?
Yeah, anytime you remove a banjo bolt, there's two washers on there, which are a soft metal. You want to replace those because that's the actual sealing part of that bolt. So the first time you get those and they're fresh from the factory and you tighten those up, they actually squish. They're malleable. So they're going to squish to that and make a watertight seal and a high-pressure seal. Now when you pull that off and you go to put that back on, they're going to be worn into that position. It's almost impossible to get that back to that position. And you're not going to mold them the same way you did before. So off camera we replace those bolts there. You could get away with it, but don't tempt it, because that's not a good thing to do there. They will leak. Something else you want to do is not leave that banjo bolt just hanging like that. I have no brake fluid in the system, so that's okay for what I got going there. But if you have any brake fluid in the system, it'll just sit and drip out of that, and you got potential of getting that on the paint everywhere. So,
Yeah, regardless, though, you're going to want to flush the brakes.
yeah, something like this, it doesn't make sense not to flush these brakes out. And you have to, anytime you disconnect any part of the hydraulic system, the brake fluid must be flushed out of it. You do not want any air in that system.
I don't
Remember,
recommend
keep
using a 3/8
everything clean
back
here.
then, but I've worked with some technicians who have.
If for whatever chance you get a little bit of brake fluid on paint, it's good to have some brake cleaner handy. Sometimes that'll save you. You don't want to spray that directly on. If you get brake fluid on the main paint job, the fenders or something, you're kind of screwed. So just don't do that. Cover them up.
So it like kind of squeezes the wash a little bit. And
A little trick there. I don't know if you could see what I did there, and
it shapes it.
when you tighten up a banjo fitting like that,
Yeah, I don't know.
and you have these new seals, what you want to do is you want to tighten it till it's tight. Then you want to back it off and tighten it past where it was tight before. And that helps you make a good seal. That helps you mold those to that area and then tighten them to that molded area. It's a little old mechanics trick I was taught years and years and years ago.
And don't forget to replace that bolt that's hidden back there that holds the brake line to the swing arm.
Yeah, you'll probably get 100 miles down before you wear a hole in that hose.
And then once you get everything reinstalled, the only thing that's left to do is bleed the system.
Check out our next video.
Yeah, if you guys need to see how to flush out a brake line, I had some front brake problems on my Harley. So look for that video coming.
Bum, 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 bum.